Hello, everybody. It's sure good to be with you again and to welcome you to episode 17 of season 2 of Travels with Bob. I'll have to say, in preface to what we're going to talk about today, that it's a delight to be back with you. We've had a hiatus in recording these podcasts and therefore being able to post them. I had COVID soon after about the middle of January, and as I was getting over that, I had a big siege just a few days ago with vertigo, and put the two of them together makes me wonder if turning 90 isn't getting to me. But I think I'm going to be okay. I'm doing pretty good. I may not have much voice, but if you'll bear with me, I think I'll get through this. And it is just so good to be back on camera and coming to you whenever you see these lessons on the great events in the Old Testament. Well, this is episode 17. We have in our episode 16, it just finished talking about the promise that God made to Abraham and how that would develop out through the centuries and the millennium and finally be fulfilled in the death, burial, and resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ after he had lived a life that was sinless. Today we want to continue with the highlights that are the Old Testament, and we want to look at the migration of Abraham's descendants into Egypt. But first, let's talk with the Lord. Dear God, we thank you for this day. We thank you that we have this electronic means of recording lessons and storing them up and streaming them later and archiving them even for the future. Father, at this juncture, as we are recording these, the war going on in the Eastern European country and the Russian invasion of that wonderful country in which we have been distributing Bibles for so many years, the Ukraine. I pray, Heavenly Father, that you will step forth with your mighty hand, and by the providence of your hand, bring something good out of this, and that soon the fighting will cease and that the Ukrainians will remain free. They've inspired the world with their dedication to their freedom in their country. Be with us today, Father, though, as we talk about things in the Old Testament that are significant, that happened so long ago and yet have an impact upon our daily lives every day. And we ask for your guidance and for the Spirit to be with us. We pray in the name of Jesus. Amen. Now, the lesson that we're beginning today begins in Genesis chapter 12, where we have been before twice, which is the call of Abraham and the promise that God made to him. But we will not tarry there. We will move onward and move into the way in which Abraham's descendants were able to get into Egypt, the migration of the descendants of Abraham that would take them into Egypt. 70 people would go there, and they would be there about 400 years. This was foretold beforehand, and they would develop in huge numbers, and numerically they would become a people that would become a nation. But becoming a nation would depend upon them coming out in the Exodus, going to the Sinai Peninsula, and at Mount Sinai be given a law and organized into the nation of Israel. Israel is the name that God changed Jacob's name to, and we'll be talking about that particular time period as we move forward in today's study. Today we want to begin looking at the background from Abraham and then forward on into the things that we're going to discuss the next couple of lessons. The background of Abraham, the promise to Abraham begins with the moment of the moving forward to the fulfillment of what Paul describes in the 3rd chapter of Ephesians in verse 11 as the eternal purpose of God. The eternal purpose of God to reconcile humanity to himself by providing atonement for sin that breached the covenant in the Garden of Eden, and atonement done and accomplished by our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Part of God's promise to Abraham was that Abraham would be the progenitor of many people. not just the one nation that God would choose as his people, the nation of Israel, the descendants of Jacob, but as a matter of fact, several nations would claim Abraham as their progenitor. Some years ago, I was with a group touring the Cappadocian part of Turkey. I flew into Istanbul and met the people the next day at the capital city. And we spent almost 2 weeks in Cappadocia. I ended up in Ephesus. And we noticed some things about the Turkish people that seemed to have Old Testament trappings. On Sunday afternoon, after me and several other members of the church had gotten together and had services in our room, we then went on tour and went actually and took a swim in the Mediterranean Sea. And as we were eating lunch that day at a restaurant, we were going to get back on the little ferry and go back out to the Mediterranean Sea. And we were having lunch, and incidentally, that country raises some of the best tomatoes you'll ever eat. And the people serving found out I liked them. They brought me a whole platter full of them. And yes, I ate every one of them. And we were sitting there, and our guide, the Turkish guide, was a Muslim. We had several discussions. And the lady that had organized the tour was from Canada. And she had Christian background, and they came to me where I was sitting with Jim Ledbetter and some of the other people on the tour. And they said, Bob, we'll be getting about 1 o'clock today, and we'll be getting stopped to a little lecture at an old ruined temple that resides under an old olive tree. And since this is the Christians' Day of Worship, we thought you might want to say a few words. He said, we have 2 atheists in this group, and we have 2 or 3 Jewish people, and then I'm a Muslim, and we may have some other Muslims, but we just thought maybe you might want to say something that would be encouraging to all 3 of our religions. No pressure, you see. So I thought about it. I thought, this is going to ruin my swim in the Mediterranean Sea. I was free. And as a bird, I was going to, but I was actually, I welcomed that opportunity. So I thought about it through the rest of the lunch and on our little trip back by water. And we stopped at an old fort in an old village. And finally we got to the Mediterranean Sea and spent most of the afternoon there before we went on up to the place of the ruined temple. And I thought, I'm going to talk about Abraham. The Muslims claim Abraham as a progenitor of their faith. Of course, naturally, the Jews do, because he's the progenitor of the Jewish race. And the Christians have a very high stake in Abraham because he is the forebear of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world. And so by the time I was called upon to talk, I had been able to work this thing through my mind quite a bit. And those of you who know me figured I would probably find a way to talk about how there can be unity in believers if we'll get back to basics. Abraham would be a unifier of all 3 of these groups, as far apart as they are in so many ways, if we all would follow Abraham from where he began to where his progeny ends with the Lord Jesus Christ. And so I took a little more than the 10 minutes that they told me I could have. I took 11 and a half minutes, just for those of you who are real strict about this. And so I talked about Abraham. Well, Abraham is a historic figure, not just for Christians or Jews or even the Muslim people. Abraham is historic in the ancient world, touching almost every culture and people that have developed over there in the Mideast and throughout the environs of what once was the Roman Empire. And so it's an interesting thing that we can start here with Abraham's beginning with his covenant with God and the promises that would end in Messiah. and look at some things and know that if we are listening, we could have something to discourse with people who are of our Jewish friends and the Muslim people who have an open mind, those that do. Well, the story begins to go forward from the 12th chapter, and God has made the promise to Abraham that he will be the father of many nations, and that he will be the father of the nation through whom all the nations of the earth will be blessed, a messianic prophecy, as all scholars seem to concur. And this would mean that Abraham and Sarah would need to have a family, at least one heir. And at this particular point in time, at the beginning, Sarah is barren. And she remains barren until she and Abraham is at least 100 years of age. And so Abraham and Sarah both advanced in years, and they will have to have children. Those who have read the Bible or are informed about Hebrews, the 11th chapter, are aware of the fact that the Bible states there that Abraham believed God. Not that he believed in God, as in the existence of God. He just believed God, put his trust, his faith in what God said, and believed that in some way God would provide the heir and the heirs that would be necessary for the fulfillment of these vast and beautiful promises that God had made to him. In fact, in the 11th chapter of Hebrews, the Hebrew writer writes that by faith Abraham believed God, and by faith Sarah conceived, and that by what they believed about God, their faith in God, their trust in God, then they did indeed become parents of Isaac and others, and that Abraham became the father of several nations, but specifically the nation that would come through the descendancy of Abraham, Isaac, and Isaac's son Jacob. And so it is that the providence of God is already in view. If we just stop to comment on it, the fact that we are going to see the unfolding of the providence of God as we begin to talk now and on for a while. And at the end of our study today, I want to give you what I think is a very good definition of what providence, the providence of God, what it means. So God would give Abraham and his wife Sarah children and a family. He would also have children by a concubine and Sarah's handmaiden, but that would not be the heir of messianic descent. That would come through Abraham and Sarah's own child, Isaac. And so he would provide for them, and God does just that. That's what providence means, providing for. And so we come in the 21st chapter of Genesis, after we leave that 12th chapter and a number of things that we've already said about it. We come to the 21st chapter and the birth of Isaac. So God is gracious to Sarah, the Bible says, and she conceives. She conceives as an old woman past the time of childbearing. Abraham is able to father a child with his wife Sarah past the time of fathering on the part of men. Just as God has promised, he has a son. And he was born at exactly the very time when God said that he had told Sarah that she would bear a child. Providence. And Hebrews 11, verses 11 through 12, inform us that this conception and birth of Isaac was a matter of faith on the part of Sarah. She conceived by faith. Abraham begat by faith. And so God provided the means of the descent that would ultimately lead to Jesus Christ. Abraham and Sarah named the boy Isaac, which means to laugh. They had both laughed at the thought that they would be having children that late in life, and so they named their son by a name that means to laugh. And when he was 8 days old, Isaac was circumcised by his father, Abraham. This was the mark of the covenant that God had made with Abraham in the giving of the promises that we've studied when we looked at the 12th chapter. So Abraham is 100 years old now. He is the father of a bouncing baby boy. That's Oklahoma, Texas. And Isaac obtains a wife, not from among the Canaanitish people, his mother Sarah just doesn't want that to happen. And so Abraham sends his servant back to Mesopotamia, from which they came in the Ur of the Chaldees, and to find a suitable wife for Isaac. The story of how Isaac is united with Rebekah, and how the servant of Abraham finds the way to make operative the providence of God in finding Sarah as the one that God had chosen is very interesting. I just regret that we can't go down off of the mountain peaks and go down into the valleys of the Old Testament and look at some of the details between these high points and significant points that are the study of this particular episodes of the travels. But at any rate, Sarah is brought back to him, and in the meanwhile, his mother Sarah had died, and the Bible says that he met her in the cool of the evening, and he got down and went to her, and he was comforted in the loss of his mother. The heritage line then is able to extend beyond Abraham. It extends through Isaac and his wife Rebekah into Jacob and Esau, their twin sons, and then through Jacob into the 12 sons of Jacob, which will become the 12 tribes of Israel. God will change Jacob's name to Israel, and that will be a mighty act of the providence of God as we go forward. But to cut to the chase, the story of Jacob, who is the grandson now of Abraham and the son of Isaac, is a pivotal segment of the Old Testament, which we now need to look at for a few minutes. God implements his promise to Abraham through Jacob's sons, the 12 sons of Israel, of Jacob. Jacob accomplishes the begetting of his 12 sons with 2 wives and the servant girls of each of the wives. Leah is his first wife that he worked 7 years to obtain from her father. He thought he was going to get Rachel, her sister, but he got Leah, and then he worked 7 more years for Rachel. Leah becomes the mother of Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, all sons of Jacob, who will become known as Israel. And then she will provide to him her servant girl, Rachel's servant girl, Bilhah, and she will be the mother of Dan and Naphtali. Then there will be another servant girl, Leah's Zilpah, and she will be the mother of Gad and Asher. And finally, bless her heart, little Rachel, God will have mercy upon her, open her womb, and she will become the mother of Joseph and Benjamin. These are the 12 sons of Jacob, who become known when God changes his name to Israel as the 12 sons of Israel. They will produce a tribe of people each, and they will be the 12 tribes of Israel. The generation of these children will extend the descendants of Abraham all the way to what we would call a clan. We start with a man and his wife, Abraham and Sarah. They produce a family, a very small family at first, Isaac and Rebekah and other siblings. And then when Isaac's son Jacob has his 12 sons, and they become the progenitors of a separate tribe of each, it's enough people to make a nation, and they will become a nation when God leads them with Moses into the Sinai desert. And so this generation of 12 sons of Jacob are a pivotal moment again. Now then, a key person in the migrating of these people to Egypt is Jacob's next to the last son, Joseph. Joseph and Benjamin are Rachel's children. She was the one that Jacob dearly loved, and she's the last one to provide Jacob with children. Benjamin is the baby. Joseph is the next to the baby. And so we, in this juncture, in Genesis 37, we come to be introduced to Joseph. And Joseph will be the leading star in the drama, along later with his father, into the rest of the book of Genesis. 13 chapters will comprise the activities of Joseph as he interacts in Egypt and with his father and with his brothers, both prior to and after they get to Egypt. So the key to the migration is Joseph himself. Joseph is the son of Jacob, or Israel, and, as I said, of his wife Rachel. The account of how God used Joseph to move this family of Jacob and 70 people into Egypt takes all the rest of the book of Genesis. It is very interesting to follow this narrative because it's a perfect illustration of, guess what? The providence of God. God providing everything that's needed to accomplish his will. Jacob and his 12 sons is the place where the promise of God to Abraham in chapter 12 fans out to become eventually a nation that we know as the nation of Israel, to later, after the Babylonian captivity, become known as the Jews into the two tribes that are left. So Jacob and his 12 sons are the basis for what would become a nation. They are, in fact, at this point, a clan. So we have a couple, Abraham and Sarah. We have a family. We have their children. We have a clan now. Jacob and his 12 sons by his 2 wives and 2 concubines. And so with Joseph, we learn how the line of God's promise to Abraham is extended by migrating to Egypt and being there about 400 years and multiplying tremendously into a multitude of people. The line of God's progress, and then thus the story of the Old Testament progresses through Joseph from here, in a sense, to the end of the fulfillment of the Messianic promises. But Joseph's time on the center stage is for this period of time, and he is the tool of God through whom God will move the Israelites into Egypt, where they will become enslaved, where God will make himself known as a blesser by his providence. And so the story of Joseph begins with that famous coat of many colors that his father has made for him. Now, that's the terminology of the King James translation and of the Textus Receptus manuscripts of the New Testament or Old Testament. It probably wasn't of colors as much as it was different kinds of cloth, but it could have been different colors. When I was just a lad, my dad would come in from the fields, and in the evening after we would have our evening meal, he would put me on it, lead me up on his lap, and he would tell me the stories of the Old Testament. And the one that I would always ask for, if he asked me which one I would like to hear, was Joseph and the coat of many colors. And I would listen enraptured by my daddy's ability to tell the stories of the Old Testament to a little boy. Precious memories for me. Well, Joseph has the coat of many colors, and he brags about some dreams that he's had, that he sees all the other brothers bowing down before him. That would be 11, because Benjamin would not have yet been born for the 12, but so the other 10 would be bowing down to him. They become very jealous of Joseph. And then his father makes this distinction of this special coat and just sows enmity by his favoritism among his sons. His 10 brothers, are out with the sheep in the pasture land. And his father sends Joseph out to see about them. And I have to make a long story short here, but they see him coming, and they conspire maybe to just take the life of this young man, but one of the brothers says that won't do. But let's put him in this pit, and we'll decide what to do with him. Well, there are some traders coming through, and they sell Joseph to these Egyptian people from Egypt that are traders. They sell him into slavery, and they kill an animal and put the blood on it, on the coat of many colors, and they show it to their father Jacob and say, our brother Joseph has been killed. He believes them, and that's not nearly the end of the story. So it's an interesting story of what happens to Joseph when he gets to Egypt. He is sold to an official by the name of Potiphar. Potiphar apparently is older than his young wife, and she takes a shine to Joseph. And one day when Potiphar is away, she asks Joseph to lie with her, and he flees, but she holds on to his garment. And then when Potiphar, her husband, comes in, she lies about the fact that Joseph didn't do anything at all, but she tells her husband that he assaulted her. And so the upshot of that is that Potiphar places Joseph in prison. It's in prison that he meets two of Pharaoh's servants. One is the cupbearer, or the butler, and the baker. They have dreams while they're in prison, and they don't understand them, and Joseph interprets them. And the one is that the cupbearer will be restored to his place, and the baker will be put to death because he tried to poison his king. Years later, sometime later, the king, Pharaoh, has a dream, and he doesn't know what it is. And the cupbearer said, I remember now, I promised this young man Joseph I would tell Pharaoh about him, and he can tell you what the dream is. So he does. He tells him there's going to be 7 years of plenty, and there'll be 7 years of famine, and they need to make ready in the 7 years of plenty for the 7 years that are coming after it, that will starve almost the whole part of the world in what we know as the Middle East. And so the upshot of it is that this conflict between Joseph and his brothers is the means that God uses his providence to get the entry in place in Egypt, whereby Joseph and his father and all of his brothers and their families will be able, at the time of the famine, after the 7 years of plenty, to migrate into Egypt and be guests of the Pharaoh that is then, at that time, that is in charge. Through a series of episodes, when Joseph interprets the dream for Pharaoh, Pharaoh makes him, in effect, the prime minister of Egypt. He makes provision for there to be storehouses all over the land of Egypt to store grain during the 7 years of plenty, so that when the famine comes, they will be able to survive. And that is the tag for getting the migration to take place. Because when the famine comes up in Israel's country, in the Canaanite land to which they will someday go and possess as their own, the famine becomes acute, and Jacob sends his sons to Egypt to buy grain. Joseph recognizes them, and through a series of events of placing their money in their bag and keeping the younger son, Benjamin, then finally Jacob and his family all move to Egypt. There are 70 of Jacob's family who are now in Egypt. And so through that series of episodes, God has used the disaster of the jealousy between Joseph and his brothers, and as a result of their father's favoritism, and God has turned something to his use in providence out of that took place many years before. And so at one point then in the ongoing procedures, Joseph reveals himself to his brothers, and they fear for their lives, and he tells them that they have nothing to worry about, that he sees this now, that God did this. God used them to sell him into slavery, that he would be placed in prison by Potiphar's wife's lies, and would interpret the Pharaoh's dreams, and that he would be made the official that would save not only the Egyptians from starvation, but all the rest of the countries around about, particularly Abraham's descendants. And so they are in Egypt now, 70 of them, who are a clan. They will be there about 400 years, and they will become so numerous that a Pharaoh that does not know Joseph will rise and be somewhat afraid of the children of Israel, of the Israelites. Now then, as we bring our thoughts to a close today, I've almost worn out the word providence, haven't I? I want to give you a definition of providence that is what I call my working definition. The providence of God is revealed here in all of these things that we've been talking about, from the promises and covenant with God and Abraham in Genesis 12, all the rest of the way through Genesis and all the rest of the way through the Bible, through time, and to eternity. So the Bible and providence are inseparable. That is, the Bible is a book of providence. In reality, the overriding theme of all the Bible is what God is doing and how God is providing. Providing primarily to fulfill his eternal purpose that Paul says in Ephesians 3:11 that he finally accomplished in Jesus Christ and fulfilled his eternal purpose to redeem humanity. So this is because the Bible is actually the self-disclosure of God. He reveals himself in the Bible. Not everything there is to know about God, but what he has revealed for us to know, it is there in the Bible. He revealed himself in the pages of the Bible. So that's to say then that the Bible is the self-revelation of God. And as I said, certainly not everything, but truly all that is given of God is a revelation about him and of him. And so in the Bible, we have the processes of God unfolding before our eyes as God provides for the necessities of everything that needs to be done to accomplish the eternal purpose that he accomplished in Jesus Christ. So there's nothing in the Bible that doesn't have something to do with God. And in the Bible, we have all the processes of God unfolding for our redemption in his providence. And so it is, after all, what God has himself revealed and appointed so that the human race would know who he is, and we would have an identity in relationship with him, and we would know that sin has destroyed the world that God created for us. We are a fallen people in a fallen world, and God's eternal purpose is to rectify that by atonement in Jesus and bringing us back to the tree of life relationship with God that was in the Garden of Eden. And so, what is the definition of providence? Well, there are many ways to define providence, and almost all of the ones I've heard are good ones. But for me, it's been a lifelong search for meaningful definitions of things about God's doing. And it's never ending, although I do have one that I think is the one that is a working definition. And so no doubt that a lot of people continue to look for things that point to the providence of God, and all you have to do is read the Bible or look back to your own personal history and see God at work in your life providentially. And so no doubt that's the case with many of you who are hearing these words. But constantly listening and hearing and how people define the providence is an ongoing thing to do. Occasionally, however, I hear a distressing, heart-rending statement. I have heard of a preacher who made this statement right here at the Lakehoma Church many, many years ago. The statement that God worked providentially in the days of the Bible. But when the Bible was completed and Jesus brought redemption, that God's providence doesn't work anymore. He's not working. Now, folks, if God is not working to provide, the human race is in a terrible plight. It is so hurtful. It is so blasphemous to say that God is not working in our world today. He is still in charge. He is still in control. We may not know why and how some of the things that are evil are tolerated, but God can always use them for a positive purpose. And so, very much so, God is still alive. If God is not working to provide, if He is not providentially active, then He's not alive. And brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, my God's alive. My heart beats with Him. Yours does too. God is providentially working. And so I want to give you what I think is the best definition of providence that I've ever heard. If anyone in the sound of my voice has been told that God is not working in providence today, please rethink that. Look around you. The sun rose this morning. Unless Jesus comes before sunset, it'll set tonight. A few days ago, we had the beautiful falling of the winter wonderland of ice and snow. The farmers love that kind of precipitation because it brings minerals into their soil and helps them in their crops. It's a blessing for all, and it is by the providence of God. So disabuse yourself of that particular thing, because the Bible indicates that not only did He create the universe in providence, He also sustains it. Hebrews 1 and verse 1 and verses following. God is eternal, and He is the author of all that happens in an ongoing universal plan of His eternal purpose. One of the psalmists says, "From everlasting to everlasting thou art God." From eternity to eternity, with a short lapse of time on earth, God is eternal and He is active. God the Father, His Son Jesus, the Holy Spirit, each had a place in creating, and they each have a place in sustaining. And I refer you to 2 Corinthians 13:14, the last verse of 2 Corinthians, for a statement to that effect. So numerous passages of Scripture indicate that all the activity on the earth and all of humans are under the all-seeing eye of God. Ultimately, it will be His will that is done in all ways. The Son of God made the promise that this is so in Matthew 28:19 and 20, when He said to the apostles just before He ascended to heaven, "All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Go and make disciples from among all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And lo, I'm with you always, even until the end of the age." So then, what is that good definition of providence that I work with? I've heard several before these, but this one is not it's not original with me. My dear wife, my sweet Carolyn, heard it given by a teacher in a Bible class for women at the Bible chair in Lawton many years ago, back in the 1960s. We lived at Apache, and Darlene Bridges, a marvelous Christian lady, well-versed in the Bible and a marvelous teacher, was teaching a class of women from throughout the area. And Carolyn and Dosa Jackson and some of the other ladies from Apache drove down there once a week, and she came back one day. And she said, "Okay, buddy, I have something that you really want." I said, "Yes, baby, you do." And she said, "You're always talking about the providence of God." And Darlene gave us a definition today I think that you really will appreciate. Well, later I had a chance to ask Darlene about it, and I said, "I really like your definition of providence, Darlene, and I'm beginning to use it everywhere I preach." She said, "You know, Bob, I don't know where I got that. It wasn't original with me, but I don't know who I got it from." And so I jokingly said to her, I said, "Well, I guess the guy you stole it from won't mind me borrowing it from you." We had a good laugh. Here is Darlene Bridges' definition that she got from somewhere of the providence of God. I break it down into 4 parts because I taught it to my students in every class that I taught through 29 years at teaching at Lakehoma Christian University. I gave them the opportunity to memorize it, and at the end of the semester, in every class I taught, I gave them opportunity to make 4 points added to their raw average if they could give me this definition word for word. Here it is. The providence of God. God working behind the scenes of human activity to bring about His will without violating human free choice. I broke it down into 4 parts. That way, if the students got all 4 of them, I could give them 4 extra points added to their raw score. There were several students that would bring their grade up from a C to a B to a B to an A. Not very many people that made an F were going to take the time to memorize it, but a few did. If they just got 1, they got 1 point. If they got 2, they got 2 points, you see. I'll repeat it because you're probably going to ask me for it next time you see me, if you're looking at this. The providence of God is God working behind the scenes of human activity to bring about His will without violating human free choice. When this definition is reasoned out, it rings true, folks. You can start in Genesis 1 and go to the end of Revelation. And everywhere you go where you see the activity of God and Him providing and having things in place, this definition will work. And many deductions arise from meditating upon this concept of God's activity working behind the scenes, not violating our free moral agency, our freedom to choose, but at the same time taking everything that humans do and turning them to a way to work out His will. I tell you, it just makes me have goosebumps to think about God being so active in our world. And I'm sure if we could have a chance to sit down and talk, we could look back in things in your life, as I can, when nothing can explain some things that happened except God providential activity. And so as we began to look at the significance of Jacob and his family, Abraham's descendants migrating to Egypt, we will from here on out be working with this definition of the providence of God, wherein He effects His eternal purpose in Jesus Christ. God bless you for being with me, and hope to see you again soon.